Hey guys, so I wanted to make a little video to help us understand the process of neurulation. And this is something that we talked about in lecture last week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you understand it by hopefully talking you through some of the images we made in class. Alright, so let's move this over. Let's shrink me down. Alright, so to start off, here's a little drawing that we did of a mature adult human brain. This is from the lateral view. This is good to go over first because this shows us kind of what these different parts of the neural tube are ultimately going to develop into. In orange down here that we have the spinal cord. As the spinal cord enters into the skull, it enlarges to become the first part of the brainstem. That's called the medulla. On top of the medulla, we have the second part of the brainstem that's called the pons. The pons is connected to the cerebellum that lies caudal to it. On top of the pons, that's where we have the midbrain that is in aqua green. Finally, or on top of that, we have the diencephalon, which consists of the thalamus right here, the hypothalamus, which is just anterior to it and below it, and then this large blue structure that represents the cerebrum, which is the big wrinkly thing that does all of the critical thinking, storage of memories that we're used to associating with the brain. Okay, so that's what ultimately the neural tube is going to develop into in a child and then ultimately an adult. But let's talk about how we get there. So neurulation is the process in which the kind of nervous system is ultimately formed. We're going to back up a little bit though. So up top right here, this represents the three germ layers. The ectoderm on top and this blue purplish color, the mesoderm in red in the middle, this circle in the middle of the mesoderm that represents the notochord, and then we have the endoderm, which is down below, that's ultimately going to become the inner lining of the gut. Okay, so we're really going to focus on the ectoderm, which is up top, because the ectoderm is what is going to turn into the nervous system and obviously the outer layer of the skin. So here's what happens. Okay, so right above the notochord, you're going to get a thickening of the ectoderm. This is called the neural plate, right? So that thickening of the ectoderm is called the neural plate, and that's this structure like right there. Okay, it's worth mentioning that the notochord is the structure that initiates the formation of this neural plate. And the neural plates ultimately become the nervous system. The rest of these cells out here on the side, those are going to become the epidermis. These cells right in between, those are going to become the neural crest cells, and as we'll learn later, the neural crest cells ultimately become the peripheral nervous system, melanocytes, which are cells that produce melanin, Schwann cells that wrap around and insulate the axons of our neurons, and glial cells, which help to support neurons as well. Okay, so back up. We get this enlargement of the ectoderm right above the notochord called the neural plate. That's initiated by the notochord. Then what will happen is that the notochord will initiate this neural plate to start kind of folding in on itself. This forms the neural groove, which is right here. And the neural groove is really caused by these cells right here in the middle, drawn in this brown color, that have this pyramid-like shape. Those are called medium cells of the medium hinge plate. And so the notochord is causing this medial hinge plate to kind of fold in to create this neural groove, which is the line in the middle. The neural groove continues to form and it becomes deeper and deeper. Ultimately, it's going to kind of fold in on itself, and that is made possible by these cells that kind of change shape along the lateral sides. Those are cells of the dorsolateral hinge plate. You'll notice that they kind of have this pyramid-like shape as well. They start to change shape, and that really causes the neural groove to kind of fold in on itself. The top of the neural groove is now called the neural folds. Okay. Now, if we keep kind of going in this sequence, once the neural grooves completely separate themselves from the rest of the ectoderm, they now form the neural tube. You'll notice that these cells right here in the middle between the neural tube down below and the ectoderm, those are cells of the neural crest. They will migrate away from this location. That's what these little arrows indicate, where these neural crest cells are then going to go on to develop the rest of the peripheral nervous system. And the melanocytes and the Schwann cells, all that other stuff. Really important stuff. However, what we've got left is what we're left with is this neural tube in the middle that is ultimately going to go on to become the spinal cord and the brain, so hence the central nervous system, whereas we have all of these ectodermal cells up top. Those are going to go on to become the epidermis. Okay, now I'm going to kind of switch pictures here because this is another picture that kind of shows us some important information. On the left hand side is a picture of a developing embryo, okay? And you can really see that this neural tube is going to extend all the way around this embryo. Okay, this is kind of the early development of the head, and this neural tube forms here, goes all the way around the head, and ends right down here at the base of the future spine. Now, the neural tube doesn't completely close all at once. In fact, there are these closure sites that will kind of form halfway down the length of the neural tube, and then it'll close up like a zipper, kind of going in either direction. The first closure site is right here, and that closure site is going to be the division between the brain stem and the spinal cord. So here's another picture of, on the right hand side of the neural tube, you're going to have these different bulges that represent different parts of the brain that are ultimately going to develop into the adult brain. This closure site 1 is going to happen right here, and that is going to represent the division between the spinal cord that goes down, and then above this, that's going to be the first part of the brainstem. Literally, it's called the myelencephalon, which will ultimately become the medulla. The second closure plate occurs right here. That closure plate is the division between the forebrain, which is going to form right here, and then also the midbrain, which forms, I guess, to above that. Okay. And what we're kind of starting to see is that you get these closure sites that differentiate these different regions of the neural tube. These different regions are going to go on to become very specific and different parts of the adult central nervous system. To go over it one more time, down below, this in orange, this represents what will become the spinal cord. In red, this is the myelencephalon, this first little bulge, which will become the medulla. In purple, we have the metencephalon, which is ultimately become the cerebellum and the pons. In aqua green, that's the mesencephalon, which will become the midbrain. In this brown color, we have the diencephalon, which will go on to become the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And then finally, in blue, we have the telencephalon, which will become the cerebrum. Now, just keep this in mind. Check this out. If we kind of put this over here, and if we go back to our picture of the adult brain that we talked about at the beginning, here's how everything kind of gets put together. I'm going to put these guys side by side if I can. Okay, maybe not. Let's try to do this side by side. Perfect. All right. So one thing you'll notice from this is that the blue telencephalon has got a lot of growing to do between this early phase of the neural tube and what the brain looks like as a newborn. As a newborn, the brain is pretty much has the similar shape and structure. It's going to continue to grow in size over the first couple years of life, but it still has this general structure. So anyways, let me back up. You have this spinal cord down below. That is the spinal cord there. The medulla in red becomes that. The metencephalon, which represents the cerebellum and the pons, is going to develop into the pons here and the cerebellum. You have the midbrain, which is the mesencephalon here, becomes this. The diencephalon, which is the thalamus and the hypothalamus, turns into this, and then that telencephalon really grows to become the cerebrum. Okay. One more thing that I'd like to mention is that if the neural tube does not close correctly, it can lead to some neural tube defects. If the neural tube does not close at site number 5, which is the bottom of the neural tube at the caudal end, that can cause spina bifida. This means that the spinal cord is going to remain exposed to the amniotic fluid. This will cause the spinal cord to degrade, which can lead to some major problems in development, even paralysis. If the neural tube doesn't close at site 2, that can lead to anencephaly, which will ultimately prevent the cerebrum from developing at all, because the amniotic fluid, which is now exposed to the telencephalon, will cause the telencephalon to degrade, and it'll prevent the cerebrum from growing at all, which is a horrific and just a horrific disorder. Okay, so hopefully this helped you all out. I know this lecture is a little bit different in format from the earlier ones, but hopefully it helps. Thank you.